Okay, good evening once again. We are continuing with our lessons on human resource management. The last time we met, we were talking about recruitment. We learned about what recruitment is. When you say recruitment, what is it? We looked at the sources of recruitment, the two main sources. We look at the internal and then the external sources. You remember when we came to the internal sources, we learned that it also has its own sources. So we looked at some of them, like the use of posters, we looked at promotions, transfers, and so forth. Then we also looked at the sources of the external recruitment. We look at the advantages and then the disadvantages of both concepts. Now we are still on recruitment. The last thing we did was the steps involved in the recruitment process. Today we are going to look at three things. You see, before an organization decides to engage somebody, to employ somebody, what are the things that the manager will consider? What are the factors that the manager will take into account before the manager decides whether he's going to use internal recruitment or external recruitment? We'll be looking at that today, the factors that a manager would consider before he takes decision as to whether he will go for internal recruitment or external recruitment. Then we also look at the factors or the things that an organization will take into consideration before they demand for personnel. Now, you see, you went for that thing from the newspapers, vacancy. Now, what are the factors that accounted for that before they employed somebody? What are the factors that accounted for that? We also look at that. And you remember, I told you that we'll be looking at the difference between recruitment and then selection. And that is what we'll be looking at this evening. So, we will be looking at the factors to consider in deciding on the sources of recruitment. We also look at the factors that influence demand for personnel. And then we also look at the difference between recruitment and then selection. So, what are the factors an employer will take into account? In other words, the employer will consider. And when you say factors, we are looking at the things that the employer will take into account before he decides the source of recruitment. In other words, there is a vacancy. Are you going to use internal recruitment or external recruitment? There are certain things you have to take into consideration before you decide whether you go for internal recruitment or external recruitment. And they are very simple, straightforward factors. The first one has got to do with policy. You know, you have done what policies are. We said policies guide action. We have talked about production policies, recruitment policies, and so forth. So if the policy in the organization is such that if there is vacancy, they are going to use internal recruitment, then once the policy says that they will use internal recruitment, that is what they will go for. If the policy says they will use external recruitment, then once the policy says they will use external recruitment, that is what they go for. So that's one of the factors the employer will take into account before he decides. So what does the recruitment policy say? Okay, the recruitment policy says that if there is vacancy, the organization will go for internal. So and remember, policies guide you. So certainly you go for the internal source. If the policy says external, you go for the external source. Or there may be particular positions. For example, the organization may decide that higher positions they may go for internal, then lower positions external. So for example, they may say that if it is a position like the human resource manager, they will go for external. Then they may say that if it is a managing director, they will go for internal. They may say that if it is a general manager, they will go for external. So once the policy has been stated and it is there, then anytime there is vacancy, then it's the policy of the organization in respect of recruitment that will determine the source that they are going to use. The second one, very simple, straightforward, is the availability of training facilities. Remember, if you want to use internal recruitment, you have to train the current personnel so that they will have the skills, the knowledge, the experience, and what have you to be able to occupy such positions. So if you have training facilities available to train them, then certainly you'll be using internal recruitment. But if you don't have facilities to that effect, in other words, if you don't have facilities to train your own workers, then you have to go for somebody who's already trained. So certainly you go for external recruitment. So the facilities available in respect of training will determine whether you are going for internal recruitment or external recruitment. The next point, straightforward, is the urgency of the recruitment. When you say something is urgent, what does that mean? Now when you go to hospital, what happens when you say this is an emergency situation? What happens? The moment they say something is urgent, then it means that you have to attend to it now. So there is a vacancy, and then you need somebody to occupy the position now. What it then means is that if there is somebody who has already been trained inside the organization, then certainly you go for the internal recruitment. If you have not trained anybody and you see it is going to take you time, the time frame for the training is going to be quite long, then certainly you have to go for external, for somebody who has been already trained. So you compare the two, internal, external, and look at the one that may be available at that material time, then you go for that one. So the agency of the recruitment will determine whether you go for internal or external. The next one, which is obvious, so simple, straightforward, is the cost involved. You look at internal recruitment, you look at external recruitment, you compare the two, the cost involved in going for internal recruitment, the cost involved in going for external recruitment. And if you think that internal recruitment will be better, for example, you see, you are likely to think that always external recruitment will be more expensive than internal. That might not be true. Because there are certain times you may have to spend so much to train somebody before the person can occupy that position. So you look at that cost. Then on the other hand, you also look at the cost involved in recruitment. You have to advertise, you invite them for interview, you go through a certain process before you get them. You look at the cost involved in doing that. If you compare the two costs and you think that relatively the internal is better than the external, you go for internal recruitment. If you think that external is better than internal, then you go for that one. So the cost involved is also very important. The next one, very simple, straightforward, has got to do with, you see, there are certain positions you need people whom you can trust. The person is going to take care of funds, money. So you need somebody who will be honest. So if there is a position which is said that you need somebody you can trust, then certainly, internal recruitment may be better. Why? You already know them. If somebody is coming from external with very good certificate, the certificate will not tell you the person's character, so you don't know the person. But you already, those who are there, you have been conducting performance appraisal, you know their character, you know everyone, and then you know that this is the person that you can trust to occupy this position. So if you are looking at reliability in respect of trust, because the person is going to occupy a certain position, then certainly internal recruitment might be the best. So that is for that one. Then the last one, simple, straightforward, is where you need a specialist. If you need a specialist, you have one inside, you use internal recruitment. If you need for example, computer specialist, and you have one there, why wouldn't you use it? But if you need a specialist, and you don't have one inside, and you think that you cannot train somebody to that effect, then certainly you go for somebody who has trained himself, who is a specialist in that field, then certainly you go for that one. So these are the factors you consider before you decide whether you are going to use internal recruitment or external recruitment. The next thing you are going to consider is the factors influencing demand for personnel. When you say demand, remember we have done demand for labor and supply for labor. So you understand what is meant by when you say demand for personnel. What does that mean? Okay, in other words, we are looking at the things you are going to consider before you decide to recruit. That is all that it means. Very simple, straightforward. The first one has got to do with technological advancement. Now, you know, those days people were using typewriters. Then the computers came. That is technology. Now, if you did, those who are using the typewriters, they cannot use the computer. Certainly, you may have to recruit somebody. You need somebody that will be able to use that technology. So, if there is any change in respect of technology, and those who are in cannot, or maybe you need additional person who will be able to operate that machine, or who will be able to work in respect of that direction, then certainly you need somebody, and therefore you have to recruit. So technological advances can make an organization, or it can influence an organization to demand for personnel. The next one, very simple, straightforward, has got to do with changes in the availability of raw materials. Now, if you want to produce a particular product, you certainly need raw materials. You know, there are certain times you want to produce 100,000 units, but raw materials may not be available for you to produce that. And at that moment, you may be able to produce, even though you have the money, everything, if the raw materials had been available, you would have been able to produce 100,000. But the raw materials are not there. Don't you know that there are certain times you go to market, you want tomatoes, and you cannot get the tomatoes? There are certain times you go, mangoes may come, assuming you are using mangoes. Certain seasons, you can get as many mangoes as you want. But there are other times you have the money, but you cannot even get the mangoes. So if the raw materials are not available, then it means that production will be low, and therefore the number of people you will need to produce. For example, if you want to produce 10,000 units of a product and you need 5 people, if you want to produce 100,000, you cannot use the 5 people to produce the 100,000. So certainly, proportionately, if 5 people were able to produce 10,000, then how many people will be able to produce the 100,000? So certainly, once the raw materials are available, and that will also affect the quantity of production, then you have to employ additional hands to be able to meet your level of production. So the point is very simple. If there are changes, so a change in respect of something can be up or down. So here we assume that you didn't have the raw materials, so you were producing below capacity. For example, 10,000 instead of 100,000, and you cannot keep more workers. That will be at cost. So some of the workers probably may be made redundant. You have learned about what is meant by an employee being made redundant. Then the season comes where you have more raw materials. Certainly, you have to employ additional hands before they will be able to produce that level that you want. So that is it. The next one has got to do with market fluctuations. Now, if you have been doing economics, you know demand and supply, or maybe you might have not done that, you do that. There are certain times demand may be high. If demand is high, then certainly you have to produce more to meet demand, and you may need more hands, so you have to employ more people. So when there's market fluctuation, when you say something fluctuates, you understand that it's up or it's down. So if demand increases, then certainly you need more people to produce. and therefore you have to recruit additional hands. The next one, very simple, straightforward. When you have internal problems and workers are leaving, if people are resigning from the organization, so you have to employ others. If there are problems and you dismiss some workers, you have to employ others. So internal problems can also be a factor that can influence demand for labor. Then the next one, when you expand, certainly you will need more people. So expansion. You remember one of the objectives of every business is growth, expansion. So once you are expanding, if you are using 2 people, at a certain point in time, you may be using 100 people. At a certain point in time, you may be using 20 people. So once you expand, you may have to employ additional hands. Or if you merge with another company, if there is merger, that one too, you may need additional hands. Or your objectives may change. The structure of the organization may change, and therefore you may need more people to be able to do whatever you want to do. So these are the factors that influence demand for personnel. And the last thing we are going to look at this evening is the difference between recruitment and then selection. What is recruitment? We have done what recruitment is. You remember the last time we met. Now, there's vacancy. So what do? You advertise. If you are going for external recruitment, you advertise in the newspaper. When it goes, a lot of people, job seekers, will certainly see your advertisement and then they will apply. So a lot of people will apply and then they come in. That is all that recruitment is. It is the process that brings in people into the organization. Remember, recruitment, when you are recruited, it doesn't mean that you have been selected. So the recruitment will bring you in. Like I demonstrated in the previous video, you saw that the organization sought for, that's the past tense of seek. So the organization sought for the people, and then the organization attracted them, they came in. So all those who came in, that is the pool that came in, that is where recruitment ended. Then there will be subsequent selection procedure that will see to the choice of the best candidate. So when we talk about selection, you see select, synonym is choose. So you now go through interviewing, you do selection test, maybe reference check, they go for medical examination, and then when you are through with that one, they look at the best candidate and you choose, that is select the person. That is what selection is all about. So if you look at this one, I said recruitment and selection. Then I said, if you look at recruitment, recruitment is seeking and attracting job applicants to fill vacancy. So you seek and you attract them. Remember, they have not been engaged, you have not given them appointment letter. They have been attracted. This is where recruitment will end. Then the process you go through to choose the best, that is where selection is. So you assess them. So assessing the suitability. Now remember, you advertise, you have your, what you call the job specification. So you know the kind of skills, knowledge, abilities, and what have you that they should have to be able to get the job, even including their age and a lot of other things. So those who came in, you assess the documents, you interview them, you do whatever you want to do to find out the one that is suitable for the job. So when you are talking about the selection, you say you are assessing the suitability of the applicant, those who apply for the job, the applicant for a job, and choosing. So that's why I've underlined the choosing. and choosing the most suitable one for the vacancy. That is what selection is all about. So if you look at the recruitment process, the recruitment will end at where you brought in the pool, and then you go through other processes or steps in order to get the best out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this evening's lesson. We will still continue with our lessons on recruitment. It's not ended yet, but let me recap what we have done so far. This evening we looked at the things or the factors that a manager would take into account, in other words, would consider before he decides on the source of recruitment. Put simply, before he decides whether he's going to use internal recruitment or external recruitment, there are certain things that he would consider. We look at the policies of the organization, we determine whether it's going to use internal source or the external source, and so on and so forth. Then we came to the factors that influence the demand for labor. Then we have also looked at the differences between selection or recruitment and selection. Until we meet again another time, all that you need to do, you listen attentively, you watch the video again and again, you read your books, and then if you have any question to any effect, you can ask in the comment section. Until we meet again another time, it's bye-bye.